things to deal with in our culture is how we manage what limited time we have. I know a few of us can really relate with that, right? Dealing with our very little time. It seems that no matter what time of day it is, we have something that we need to fit into that little itty-bitty slot. Schedules and planners for many of us become like second wallets. And our calendars begin to look like a toddler got a hold of it and just drew all over it. We begin to write so small that we can't even read what's on our calendars, right? Because we need to fit it all in that space. I know that I have been guilty in the past of attempting to micromanage every second of my day, planning it out. I'm not guilty of just doing it in the past, but in the present too, right? If I need to leave at 2:15, I used to wait until exactly 2:15 and 0 seconds to go. I will sit and wait for the microwave to reach 0 seconds instead of pressing the button and opening the door with 1 second left. There are times that I have been very tempted to adhere to rigid schedules that have been the times that I have been most tempted to adhere to rigid schedules are the times that I have been the most overextended. Every minute, every second counts. I think that when we have busy lives, planning becomes more than simply a necessity for us in order for us to keep everything straight. But in fact, planning becomes a place of comfort that shows us that somehow or another we have control and we can actually handle it. Even if going to visit our mother takes an hour, but we wrote down only 45 minutes for it to make us feel like, yes, I can make it in time for the next spot as well. Right? The reality is that oftentimes our planners are just an attempt at claiming control. Stressing the claiming part because do we actually have control? No. We try to claim control and ability over a schedule that we really have no control over at all. Well, while not everyone plans out their day to the minute, to the second mark, we all, to some degree or another, attempt to control and plan out our days, weeks, months, or years. Today I will do this. After lunch I will do that. The next week I'm going to go there. In a year, I hope that I've accomplished these things. We have a great need in our lives for control over what we have no power over. We daily fight with the realization that we are not in control. And when the realization creeps in, we grasp even tighter onto our plans and become more rigid and more set in stone for hope that somehow becoming more rigid can make the control more of a reality. Nothing can move because if we take a day off, if I cancel that plan, if I bump this forward or backwards by 20 minutes, then my whole day is going to fall apart and we are going to lose everything. In the midst of all this rigidity and control, we might realize that we have forgotten something. God's call on our lives. Unfortunately, you will find it very difficult to take out your planner and say, okay, God's call in my life will fit into this time slot. I've got between 1 and 2 for that, and then at 2 it's over with. It doesn't quite work that way, does it? Unfortunately. Because God's call cannot be controlled, it cannot be planned, and it cannot be marked on a calendar. It just happens. And since God is so unpredictable, and He refuses to leave any of our schedules alone, because we have to admit to one basic truth. When God calls, that means we're going to have to cancel something. Right? And God is going to call, and we are going to have to cancel something. Something that was very important to us. So since God refuses to leave any of our schedules alone, we end up being forced to make time for Him in our already busy schedule. But in our attempts to make time for God, we have to ask ourselves, are we reversing our priorities and making God the thing that squeezes into our schedules? God is the schedule. If God is in control and we are not, which no matter how much we try to be in control, we have to realize that we have no control. And God's the only one who actually has control. Whether we are willingly giving it to Him or not, God is still in control. Right? If God is in control and we are not, then all of our goals, visions, tasks, and planners need to be added to His schedule. God should be the only one planning our day, right? We can add things in, but it should be our schedule it should be His schedule that we're fitting our day into. The righteousness of God, it can't wait till 2:15. Or for today, let's say noon. Right? We can't wait for the righteousness of God until noon. We cannot plan for tomorrow what must be done today. If our relationship with God is supposed to be our number one priority, and how many of us would say that it is our number one priority? Okay? And how many of us would look at our calendars and say it is our number one priority? We should realize the clash there. Right? If God is to be our number one priority, then we must allow our relationship with Him to dictate the order of events and time in our lives. God can't simply come first. We should understand that. Because sometimes this is what we understand. Okay, God comes first and then I can do everything else. God can't come first on our schedule. God must be our schedule. And we must work everything else into God's schedule for us. Which means, guess what? There isn't enough room for your schedule and God's schedule, so not everything's going to be able to work into. Because one of the biggest oxymorons you can ever come up with is making time. How many of us can make time? How many minutes are there in an hour? How many hours are there in a day? How many days in a week? How many weeks in a year? Okay, how many of you can change that? Okay, none of us can make time. It's not possible. So we need to stop making time and realize that we need to start shaving off some things to fit into the time that we have. Right? Turn with me over to James chapter 4. James chapter 4, starting in verse 13. James chapter 4, verse 13. One thing we should realize, I know we've been talking a lot about relationships lately. What we should realize is, I can't fit Sarah into a schedule. I definitely can't fit Mirabay into a schedule. I can't fit the church into a schedule. I can't fit anybody into a schedule. I can't fit God into a schedule. Because relationships are schedule breakers. That's one of their biggest purposes, I guess, in life, is to bust our schedule to pieces until it falls completely apart. Because you cannot maintain a schedule and maintain relationships. It's not possible. Relationships destroy schedules, including our relationship with God, and as we've been talking, especially our relationships with one another. So, in order for us to engage in a relationship, we have to be not just acknowledging that relationships destroy schedules, but we have to be willing to allow our relationships to mess up our schedules. And we have to be okay with that, and even maybe encourage that sometimes. But for now, let's turn to James chapter 4, verse 13 through 17. It reads, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is a sin." Now, let's not get caught up in the first line where it says today or tomorrow. Because we have to remember cultures are different. America and much of Western Europe is very unique from the rest of the world, in that the rest of the world plans their days, their weeks, and their years. We plan our minutes. We micromanage down to the minute and the second. That is not normal outside of the United States and Western Europe. That isn't normal. And so when James is writing to this group, he's not talking to a group that's micromanaging their minutes and their hours. He's talking about a group who are trying to manage and plan ahead for their days, weeks, and years. Okay? Imagine what he would say to us when we're trying to break that down even further and be even more rigid than what they're trying to do. Right? So we should understand James' message as being even stronger to this group here than it was to that group there. Right? Now, many of us might be thinking, there's no way that we could succeed without planning the next step, right? We have to think ahead. And I can sympathize with that. I definitely am thinking the same thing. I am a very time-oriented person. You can ask Sarah that. She will answer that with a very affirmative yes. I have always struggled with this passage because I want to see, I want to know, and I want to control. When I teach, I have classes planned out at least 1 to 2 months ahead. As we can see, we've got a calendar planned out for at least through mid-September. We've already got the next study planned out. It's just not on the calendar yet. Okay? I plan ahead. I like to plan ahead. I like to know what I'm going to do. And it bugs me greatly to know that, not this week, but next week I'm going to be gone for Wednesday, which means I'm going to have to change the calendar all around and bump everything back a week. I've lost control. I have a notebook full of sermon ideas and outlines. And I dare not touch any one of those ideas or topics until I finish the one that I'm currently on. Which means I say, okay, this is a great idea, but we're going to do this, a month down the road. We're going to do this 2 months down the road because this one's going to get in the way of that. And I wouldn't dare interrupt that schedule. But sometimes when things happen like what we see in Boston with the Boston Marathon and Explosion, Texas, you got to interrupt the schedule and you have to do something different because life dictates it. And we're going through stuff. And stuff does not wait till we have time for it, does it? In fact, it tends to come up when we're the busiest. And then you have to think about, I've had a few life changes in the last year, haven't I? How about Mirembe? I mean, listen to her. She's trying to interrupt everything right now, right? She's crying. She's making a mess of things. Sarah's going, just be quiet so I can hear. Just be quiet so she doesn't disturb anything. Don't make so much noise. And Mirembe's going, nope, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm going to mess up everybody else's schedule. Mirembe's nap comes at 8:30 a.m. She wakes at 11 a.m. I then proceed to feed her, and then I eat my lunch. She plays until 1 p.m. I feed her a little more, and then she lays down for another nap at 3 p.m. I feed her once more, and she plays until 4:30 p.m. until Sarah gets off of work. How many times do you think my day actually looks like that? Woo! That never works out. I don't schedule her, she schedules me. Sometimes she takes her nap earlier. Sometimes it's later. Sometimes her nap can go for 20 minutes. Other times it can go for 3 hours. Sometimes she doesn't want to eat. Many days, she does not want to play by herself. So she looks at me and screams until she is held. Then sometimes the schedule is going absolutely perfect. But I need that notebook or that pencil from the other room. So I get up and I leave the room to get it, and guess what happens? She screams because I left the room. And do you think just because I came back in the room she's going to stop screaming? No! Now that she's screaming, she remembers, oh, I want to be held. Well, so much for that perfect day, right? On top of that, Sarah doesn't work the same schedule every day. And so that means I don't get to schedule it out and then at 4:30 go get Sarah and everything's good and we're good to go, right? Instead, when Sarah doesn't go to work until noon, that means that her schedule completely changes, what schedule she does have, and that means the rest of my day is all up in the air because who knows what's going to happen. I have absolutely zero control over Mirembe. And since I have zero control over Mirembe, how am I supposed to have any control over what I do and what I plan and my schedule? I can't. Instead, my schedule has to look a lot more like tasks. I hope to get this accomplished. And I stress I hope because if she's having a bad day, I'm going to get nothing accomplished. Now, luckily for some of us, and maybe not so for others, I don't think that God's telling us to necessarily stop planning, but rather He's telling us to stop controlling. In other words, it's okay to plan looking at it. It's okay for us to be planning for the last 2 months to go over to Denise and Rogers for a picnic. But when the rainstorm comes, we shouldn't be sitting outside and say, we're going to have a picnic no matter what happens. I don't care if it's raining, we're going to sit in the rain. James says we should stop controlling and rather say, if the Lord wills, this is what I intend to do. This is what I hope to get accomplished. And so we have to ask ourselves, how fluid is our schedules? If God's call comes, and so many times I don't think it's that we're unable to change our schedules, but we're unwilling to change our schedules. How willing are we to drop everything because God has called us to this or that? Because a relationship has demanded that we nurture and encourage and comfort. Are we willing to forgo what maybe our plans are for the day if God so chooses? Say, for example, you need to go out to minister to someone, listen to, or just fellowship with one of your brothers and sisters. Or maybe you see a need presented that you know you should do something about. I think this is one of the problems that the Pharisees dealt with and why they grew so angry with Jesus every time he healed. They knew that to heal was to do good. And to do good was to do the will of God. But to heal on the Sabbath was to break their schedule and to lose control. Well, if you do this good on the Sabbath, but then you're going to do that good too. And then you're going to do that, and then you're going to say, well, this is working is a good thing, right? So then you're going to suddenly be working. If I break my schedule this time, I'm going to break it every time. And then there's going to be no schedule, and I'm not going to have any control at all. To allow God's will to change their schedule and overshadow their priorities, for them was unacceptable. Remember how much we've been emphasizing relationships. Well, again, we've already said this once, but how many of our relationships can function on a controlled schedule? How many of us can plan relationships? It's not possible. Relationships can't be controlled. And if you've ever tried to control a relationship, you know exactly that your relationship can't be controlled. Because you probably don't have that relationship anymore. Someone shows up late. Our conversation is going longer than I planned. They aren't available when I am. They need me now, but I don't have time now. Relationship interrupts schedules and plans. It lacks control. Relationships are uncontrollable. To try to control something, or specifically someone, which was never meant to be controlled, will actually give us less control and even destroy relationships. People cannot and should not be controlled. There are a lot of things that need to be done here at this church, right? In this church community. But more importantly, there's a lot of things that need to be done as the church community. Oswego Church of Christ needs members who are actively involved. We need to see a lot of one another, and we need to do a lot together. And just doing clothing giveaways together, I mean, there's a lot of good that does that, but, going out to the zoo together, that's a lot of fun too. And, I had a great time. And, you learned a lot of things about people. Sue just walked out, unfortunately, but I learned a lot of things about Sue. We're walking through the zoo, and she wants to climb on this tiger statue so she can get her picture too. And there's Judy right behind her. And, they're having a great time. Sue's a lot of fun. I didn't know that beforehand. And it wasn't because we served together. It's just because we enjoyed some time together. This is what it means to be a church. But when we look at all of these needs on our time, we realize that our time that we have available doesn't match up with the time required in order for us to have good relationships. How am I supposed to be here when I need to be there? James tells us that for us to know what is the right thing and to wait until tomorrow to do it is sin. But I just don't have the time. And I obviously can't make time. So what does that mean? Something has to go. I think this all comes back again to the way we manage our time. We need to make it very clear. We are not called to make time for God. To make time for God implies creating something that doesn't exist. It implies that our priorities are backwards, that God is something to be fitted in rather than something to fit into. First and foremost, we need to stop making time for church and for God. Even relationships and fellowship should be more important than our schedules. Instead, we need to start prioritizing our time. If you continue to try to make time for yourself, for more things, there's only one thing that's going to happen. You're going to find yourself doing less things well because you only can do so many things well. You can do lots of things, but you only can do so many things well. And you're going to start finding yourself just burning out. It's not possible to make time. Therefore, if we're called to do something, which we quite clearly are, right? Then that means something else has to go. In order for us to be active disciples, we must sacrifice other things that maybe we want, or maybe we believe that we need in order to be available. Working hard is godly and necessary. We need to make a living, and God knows that. But the question is, what are we working hard at? What kind of life are we investing in? In John 15:8, it tells us that the kind of fruit that we produce is the evidence of our discipleship. For some of us, our fruit looks awfully green. It's not because it's not right, it's because it looks a lot like dollar bills. Put another way, the way we use our time is evidence of whose disciple we are. We are all disciples of something. The purpose of a disciple is to become like their master, to learn his trade. The disciple of a carpenter will be a carpenter, yes. Of a painter. Okay, and so on, right? This is pretty simple. So, if we are to call ourselves disciples of Jesus, who's also known as the suffering servant, then doesn't that mean that we are seeking to also become suffering servants? How we spend our time, where we prioritize our life, is evidence of what we are a disciple of. Whether it be a disciple of work, money, laziness, recreation, or of Jesus. We cannot allow the world, our job, or anything else to determine our commitment level or our depth of engagement with our faith in our church. I know this is very difficult because even now we're probably all still thinking, where's the time going to come from? What could I possibly shave off? And we're going, I don't think there is anything. Obviously, this requires a lot of prayer. And what's really important, you can't do it yourself. Which means sometimes we're looking at our schedules going, what can be shaved off? Well, nothing. Maybe we need a fresh set of eyes. There's a reason we have brothers and sisters. There is a reason we have a community of the church, right? And that's hard. That is hard. To let someone else look at your schedule and say, I think you need to cut that out. To let someone else take control of what you do with your life. That's really difficult. In fact, for some of us, that might be darn close to impossible. There's not much time in the day. There are bills that need to be met. And there is the call of Christ to be accomplished. But we have to realize that there is a way. We may not have the answer to the question how or where, but we have to believe and have confidence that God never calls us to something He's not going to give us the ability to complete. There is a way. Where there is not a way, God is capable of making one. We can't be afraid. Luke 12:22 says, Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. Now skipping down to verse 30. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek His kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Our life should be prioritized as such, seeking the kingdom of God and adding the tasks of life to that seeking. So seeking first, and everything else is added to that. We shouldn't be adding the kingdom to our life. Rather, we should be adding our life to the kingdom. And we should have no fear in prioritizing our life in this way. Jesus tells us that when we pursue God, He'll take care of us. He says, do not be afraid. If we are to live as disciples of Christ, then we need to live with a sense of priority. We need to have the ability and, more importantly, the determination to allow the righteousness of God to interrupt the schedule of life. When we are presented like Jesus, an opportunity to heal or to serve, to do exactly what we know we're supposed to be doing, then we ought to have the mindset and ability to forego our plans as God wills. We need to live life with a sense of urgency. We know that we are called to love, to serve, to forgive, to have mercy. Then if we know we should be doing those things, we can't wait and pencil them in for Monday. As James says, to know the right thing to do and to not do it is sin. To put something off until tomorrow that we know should be done today is sin. We cannot hope to one day fellowship regularly, to one day forgive, to eventually show love and mercy. It must be prioritized and accomplished. But we have to remember, that means something has to go. If you have bridges that need mending, relationships need healing, peace that needs to be sowed, then you need to do it right now. James says it is not good enough to simply acknowledge the truth or to even practice it tomorrow. In order for our faith to be alive and well, it must be practiced today, in this moment. Again, we must prioritize our time, using it to fellowship with our brothers and sisters and to serve in community. James' call on us is not an impossible one. Most of his hearers, we have to remember, would have probably been slaves with zero control over their life. But yet somehow found a way to continually and regularly meet with the church and to serve together. There is a way. There is only fear and control that's holding us back. The only way for us to truly have control is for us to turn it over to the one who is truly in control. Only when we trust God and relinquish control to Him do we gain the security and peace that we hope to attain. So let's stop making time for God, and let's start allowing Him to be our time. Let's forgo the rigidity of control and planning and say, Lord willing. Let's allow God to interrupt and determine our lives and our schedule for the purpose of His kingdom. Sing one